You ever heard of Sturmöffschiene? It's this fantastic Russian word for that last-minute, all-out panic to finish something you probably should have started, weeks ago. Sound familiar? Well, it's a fascinating idea, and believe it or not, it's our jumping-off point for a much, much bigger question. Why is Russia the way it is? I mean, to really get a handle on its culture, its politics, its whole place in the world, you have to go way back. We have to look at the powerful forces that forged this nation. Forces like extreme geography, unshakable beliefs, and yeah, devastating invasions. And it all starts with the land itself.
So here's our roadmap for this journey. We're going to start with the absolute foundation, the land, a place of serious extremes. Then we'll see how the very first Russian state was born on its rivers and how a brutal Mongol invasion changed absolutely everything. After that, we'll watch Moscow rise from the ashes. And finally, we'll put all the pieces together to understand Russia's unique identity as a bridge between two worlds.
All right, first up, a land of extremes. And I can't stress this enough. You really can't get Russia's story without getting its geography. It's not just the background scenery. For most of its history, the land has been the main character. Okay, check this out. This slide tells you almost everything you need to know. On the left, we've got a map of average temperature. See all that deep blue and purple? That is extreme cold. Now look at the map on the right, showing where people live. See a pattern? The population is crammed into those few, tiny, warmer spots in the west. That's not a coincidence, folks. That's geography as destiny. The climate decided where people could live and farm from day one. And the reason for that massive population split? It's right here, the Ural Mountains. They basically slice the country in two, creating this transcontinental giant. To the west, you have European Russia. To the east, the huge, frozen expanse of Siberia. And this simple geographic line is the source of Russia's centuries-long identity crisis. Is it European or is it Asian? Just how big a deal is that divide? Well, this number says it all. A whopping 80% of Russia's people live west of the Urals, in the smaller European part. And why? Simple. That's where you find the richer soil, the milder weather, and the all-important rivers. Life everywhere else is just unbelievably harsh. So how in the world do you build a country in a land like this? Well, the answer involves two things: rivers and raiders. This is the origin story of Russia, and it includes a fateful choice that would shape its identity for the next 1,000 years. So way back in the early Middle Ages, you have these Slavic groups migrating across Eastern Europe. And they're not building big cities or empires, not yet. They're settling along this incredible network of rivers. These rivers became their highways, their lifelines, and their main connection to the outside world. But the Slavs weren't the only ones using these river highways. Vikings, who were called Varangians in the east, realized these rivers were a direct shot from Scandinavia all the way down to the super-rich Byzantine Empire. They came to trade, sometimes to raid, and as the story goes, they eventually decided to stay. Around 862, a Varangian chief named Rurik reportedly took control in the city of Novgorod. His successor, Oleg, pushed the capital south to Kiev, a prime spot on the Dnieper River. And just like that, this loose collection of principalities, known as Kievan Rus, became the very first Russian state. But the single most important moment for this young state came about a century later, under a ruler named Vladimir the Great. He wanted to unite all his people under one powerful religion. He looked around, weighed his options, and made a choice that would define Russia forever. He chose Orthodox Christianity from the Byzantine Empire. This was a monumental decision. It wasn't just about faith. It brought the Cyrillic alphabet, a whole new model for how church and state work together, and, most importantly, it pointed Russia's cultural compass firmly toward the east, not toward Western Catholic Europe. Now, the Kievan Rus was thriving for a while, but its golden age was about to be brought to a violent, brutal end. We've now reached what might be the single most transformational event in early Russian history: the Mongol interruption. I mean, just look at the sheer scale of this map. In the 13th century, the Mongol Empire was the largest land empire the world had ever seen. The western part of it, which became known as the Golden Horde, came sweeping across the steppes, and the divided, bickering Russian princes were right in its path. The invasion, led by Genghis Khan's own grandson, Batu Khan, was unbelievably fast and merciless. The Russian princes couldn't get it together to fight them off. Thriving cities, including the magnificent capital of Kyiv, were burned to the ground. For the next 240 years, the Russian lands would suffer under what's called the Tatar yoke, forced to pay huge amounts of tribute to their Mongol overlords.
But here's the crazy paradox. While the Mongol yoke was a total disaster in so many ways, it also, weirdly, planted the seeds for a brand new and very different kind of Russia. This is the story of how Moscow rose from the ashes. So the long-term effects were huge. For one, Russia was completely cut off from Europe right when the Renaissance and the Age of Discovery were happening. Culturally, the Orthodox Church started teaching that submission to your ruler was a virtue. And politically, the princes of this one little town called Moscow played a very clever long game. They got themselves appointed as the Mongols' chief tax collectors. This let them hoard wealth and power, and even crush their rivals, all with the Mongols' blessing. This quote really says it all. After a couple of centuries of Mongol domination, Russia's neighbors didn't really see it as European anymore. Its customs, its politics, its whole way of being just seemed different, alien, Asian. And that feeling, both from the outside and the inside, created this deep-seated outsider identity that has stuck around for centuries. The guy who finally broke the yoke was his Prince of Moscow, Ivan III, who we now call Ivan the Great. In 1480, he just refused to pay the tribute anymore, and that was that. Mongol rule was over. But he didn't bring back the old, decentralized Kievan Rus. No way. Instead, he built something totally new, a centralized, autocratic Russian state, using a model of absolute power he'd learned, in many ways, from the Mongols themselves. Okay, so let's put all the pieces together. How do these elements, the brutal geography, the Eastern faith, the centuries of invasion, create the Russia we see today? This is all about Russia's identity as a bridge between worlds. You know, if you had to boil it all down to a simple formula, this would be it. You start with a foundation of incredibly harsh geography. You add the cultural and spiritual DNA of Byzantine Orthodoxy, and then you let that cook for 240 years under authoritarian Mongol rule. The result? Something completely unique, not fully European, not really Asian either. And you can literally trace that long, complicated journey on this map. It starts as Kievan Rus. After the Mongols, it comes back as the Grand Duchy of Moscow. That grows into the Tsardom, then the massive Russian Empire, then the Soviet Union, and finally, today's Russian Federation. Each name is another chapter in this epic story of survival and transformation. And this, right here, is the key takeaway from all of this. This one-of-a-kind history created this powerful, lasting outsider's status. Russia often sees itself as its own distinct civilization, a bridge connecting continents, but not really a full member of either club. And that perspective, born from 1,000 years of history, still shapes how Russia views the world and how the world views Russia. So we'll end with a question to leave you with. How does this 1,000-year-old story, a story of geography, faith, and invasion, help us make sense of Russia's place in the world right now? Because the past, as you can see, is never really past. Thanks for joining me on this one.